the summer of 1847, the quiet farming town of Culpeper, Virginia, was shaken by a horror so profound that authorities destroyed records, silenced witnesses, and buried the truth for generations. Over just 6 weeks, 27 people vanished without explanation. The only traces were strange symbols carved into oak trees, belongings arranged in eerie geometric patterns, and 2 names whispered in fear: Ezekiel and Nathaniel Crow. Twin brothers 27 years old, who had returned after a decade away, carrying knowledge no God-fearing community should face. Thanks to a set of courthouse documents that miraculously survived the Great Fire of 1851, we can now uncover what truly happened that summer and why the United States government has kept the case sealed for 175 years. What makes this mystery even more unsettling is that it unfolded during one of the most well-documented eras of American history. Yet all evidence was erased from official record. In 1847, Culpeper was a thriving community of 800 nestled between the Rappahannock River and the Blue Ridge Mountains. Founded in 1759, the town prospered on fertile farmland that produced tobacco, corn, and wheat for surrounding counties. Main Street bustled with merchants and craftsmen under the watch of the courthouse clock tower, a symbol of law and order. Families had lived side by side for generations. Church attendance was a social expectation, and Reverend Marcus Holloway, stern but respected, had guided the town's moral compass for over 20 years. Among the most prominent families were the Crows. Their patriarch Jeremiah owned the largest general store and several hundred acres of farmland. He had married Rebecca Thorne of a distinguished Richmond family, and in 1820 they welcomed identical twin sons. Ezekiel, born first, possessed piercing pale blue eyes and a cold intensity that unsettled even in childhood. Nathaniel, more charming and quick-witted, carried a hidden edge behind his easy smile. The brothers were inseparable, often speaking in a private tongue only they understood. Gifted students, they excelled not only in common subjects, but in anatomy, natural philosophy, and experimental sciences, knowledge far beyond what most rural boys pursued. But in 1837, scandal erupted. Sarah Wickham, a farmer's 16-year-old daughter, was found dead in the woods with strange markings the town doctor could not explain. Witnesses reported seeing the Crow twins nearby, though no charges were brought. Within weeks, Jeremiah announced his sons would leave to study with a relative in Boston. For 10 years, the town heard nothing of them, aside from rare letters sent to their parents. During that decade, life in Culpeper carried on. Children were born, families grew, and the memory of the Crow brothers faded into the background. Then, on June 15th, 1847, the afternoon stagecoach brought 2 tall men in black suits back to Main Street. Their pale blue eyes surveyed the town with a chilling familiarity. Ezekiel and Nathaniel Crow had returned, and with them came a suffocating unease that seemed to wrap itself around the community. They took rooms at the Culpeper Inn, where the widow Martha Henley recalled the acrid, unsettling smells that leaked from their chambers. Their first public act was to reclaim their inheritance. After all, Jeremiah had died of consumption 3 years earlier, and Rebecca had followed soon after. The Crow estate, held in trust, now belonged once more to the twins. County Clerk Benjamin Fletcher, who processed the inheritance, later recorded in his diary that the Crow brothers had returned utterly transformed. Their hands bore the scars of chemical burns, their posture radiated. Arrogance masked his confidence, and their eyes carried a weight he could not forget. Almost immediately, they began restoring their family estate on the hill overlooking town. Wagons from Richmond arrived daily, loaded with crates and barrels. They unloaded themselves, refusing any assistance. Inside were strange instruments, books, and chemicals, unlike anything the townsfolk had seen. For weeks, neighbors whispered about the constant deliveries, the lights glowing late into the night from the upper windows, and the thin ribbon of smoke rising without pause from the old kitchen chimney. In public, the twins remained polite but aloof. They attended church but never joined in communion, their pale eyes fixed more on the congregation than on Reverend Halloway's sermons. They spent freely at local businesses, always in gold rather than paper, their courtesy so cold and precise it left merchants uneasy. It was 12-year-old Timothy Crawford, a stable boy at Hamilton's livery, who first noticed something was wrong. Familiar with the routines of townsfolk, Timothy realized that regular customers were failing to appear. On July 2nd, he asked his employer James Hamilton why Mrs. Kemp had missed her weekly riding lesson and why Farmer Dobson had not collected his mare. At first, Hamilton dismissed the concerns as ordinary changes in schedule. But soon the absences piled up, the widow Patterson no longer visiting her husband's grave, Jacob Stone missing his poker game, and schoolteacher Catherine Brennan failing to open the schoolhouse. What began as coincidence became impossible to ignore. Reliable members of the community were vanishing without a trace, their homes untouched, their belongings undisturbed. When Hamilton finally pressed Sheriff William Torres to investigate, the sheriff was skeptical, insisting that summer travel and family visits explained the disappearances. But doubt crept in when his own deputy Marcus Glenn failed to report for duty on July 8th. Glenn, a man of military discipline, never deviated from his schedule. Torres visited the deputy's boarding house and found everything in perfect order, the bed neatly made, his uniform pressed and hanging in the wardrobe, his revolver resting untouched on the desk. Only one thing was out of place, a sheet of paper lying half hidden beneath the bed. On it was a symbol drawn in dark charcoal, a circle enclosing interlocking triangles, surrounded by markings that resembled no known alphabet. The sight filled Torres with a dread he could not explain. He folded the page carefully, slipped it into his coat, and resolved to keep silent until he could uncover more. That night, as he walked his rounds, he watched the town with new, uneasy eyes. Main Street was unnaturally quiet for a summer night. Shops that should have been open were shuttered porches, empty, the usual sounds of children's laughter and clattering supper pans replaced by a heavy stillness. As Sheriff Torres passed the Crow estate, his steps faltered. Two silhouettes stood against the glow of the upper windows, perfectly still, staring down at the town like sentinels. Their rigid stillness was wrong. No shift of weight, no gesture, just silent observation. When Torres blinked, they were gone. But the yellow light in the windows burned until dawn. By morning, any hope of coincidence vanished. Mrs. Henley discovered 3 of her guests gone without a trace, a merchant, a traveling preacher, and a young couple on their honeymoon. Their rooms showed signs of occupancy, luggage untouched, beds slept in, yet the guests themselves had vanished. Carved into each window frame was the same ominous symbol, a circle intersecting triangles, strange markings etched along the perimeter. Word spread quickly, and the town's unease hardened into fear. Sheriff Torres called an emergency meeting for July 12th, gathering nearly 200 anxious townsfolk inside the Baptist church. Reverend Halloway's opening prayer, usually a pillar of strength, trembled with desperation. Torres then presented the grim tally: 23 people missing, ages 16 to 68, taken from every walk of life. Their homes and belongings left untouched, no notes, no preparations, no signs of violence. It's as if Torres admitted they simply stopped existing. From the pews, a voice broke the silence. "Sheriff, what about the Crow twins? They come back after 10 years and now this starts. That can't be chance." Murmurs of agreement rippled through the congregation, but Torres raised his hand. "I won't allow accusations without proof. They've broken no laws. Suspicion isn't evidence." Yet even as he said it, doubt gnawed at him. The evidence he had quietly gathered troubled him deeply. The Crows had ordered large quantities of embalming agents, preservation chemicals, and surgical tools from Richmond, items no ordinary townsman needed. Anatomical charts and instruments arrived alongside crates of scientific equipment. Neighbors reported unnatural lights weaving through the Crow woods at night. Not lanterns, but flickering shapes that moved with purpose. Sarah Dalton swore she'd seen them, and her husband Robert had found carcasses of animals, deer rabbits, even livestock arranged in chilling geometric patterns. The meeting ended with the formation of volunteer patrols and strict instructions for families to stay together. But it all felt like a frail defense against something no one understood. As the townsfolk filed into the humid night, many turned their eyes toward the hill. The Crow House loomed against the twilight, its windows glowing, and once again, two motionless figures stood watching the town below. Dr. Thomas Fairfax, pale and visibly shaken, waited until the crowd dispersed. Approaching the sheriff, he withdrew a worn leather portfolio from his medical bag. His voice trembled as he spoke. "Sheriff, there's something you need to see." "Something I found in my predecessor's files," Dr. Fairfax said, sliding the worn portfolio open. Inside were the private notes of Dr. Edmund Parrish, written during his examination of Sarah Wickham's body in 1837. These records had never been submitted to the authorities. Parrish's observations described something far darker than an unexplained death. Sarah's body bore signs of what he called experimental manipulation: incisions cut with surgical precision, organs removed and replaced without medical purpose, and traces of chemicals, suggesting deliberate preservation after death. The final entry chilled Torres to his core. "In 40 years of practice, I have never witnessed such cold, purposeful experimentation upon a human subject. Whoever performed this work possesses advanced knowledge of anatomy and chemistry, yet no trace of human compassion. I dread what may happen if this person is allowed to continue unchecked." Closing the portfolio, Fairfax met the sheriff's eyes. "I believe Sarah Wickham was murdered by the Crow twins a decade ago. And I believe they've spent the past 10 years perfecting their methods. If I'm right about the townsfolk who are missing." He left the rest unsaid. The silence was heavier than words. The volunteer patrols organized after the town meeting soon brought discoveries more terrifying than reassurance. On the night of July 15th, 3 men, farmer Robert Dalton, Henry Vance, and merchant Samuel Reed, stumbled upon what would later be called the arrangement site. The clearing, once a playground for local children, had been transformed into something both meticulous and monstrous. Laid out in a perfect spiral were 23 personal belongings unmistakably linked to the missing bonnet. A pocket watch, a wedding ring, a leather Bible, each object placed with mathematical precision, measured to the inch. At the spiral's center lay a circle of stones within which the earth had been carved with the crow symbol. This time it was larger, more elaborate, the interlocking triangles now surrounded by markings that resembled an unknown written language. But it was the trees that unsettled the men most. Bark had been stripped in repeating patterns, branches cut away to form deliberate sightlines, and symbols etched, so that when viewed from the clearing's center they seemed to connect into a larger design. This was no accident. It was construction. Samuel Reed, once a professional surveyor, studied the scene with trained eyes. His voice dropped to a whisper as the realization struck him. "Gentlemen, this isn't random. Every measurement here is exact," Reed whispered. "The spiral follows a mathematical progression. The stones align with geometric principles, and the symbols, they're not random scratches. This was designed by someone with advanced knowledge of mathematics and engineering." The patrol wasted no time reporting their discovery. By dawn, Sheriff Torres arrived at the clearing with Dr. Fairfax and Reverend Halloway. The 3 men stood in silence, each struggling to absorb the implications. This was no work of madmen, but a calculated operation built with precision and purpose. Reverend Halloway, usually so grounded in scripture, faltered. "I've studied pagan rites, ancient rituals, but this fuses old belief with modern science. It shouldn't be possible." Fairfax knelt at the carved symbol's magnifying glass in hand. These incisions were made with surgical tools, not knives or farming blades. And here, he touched the dark residue around several marks. Blood, preserved with chemicals. It should have rotted in this heat, yet it's been stabilized. As they studied further, more unsettling details emerged. The entire arrangement was positioned to be viewed from the upper windows of the Crow estate, as though the brothers had built the clearing as a stage for their private observation. The stripped trees with their sight lines and carved marks pulled the gaze inexorably toward the spiral's center. It was hypnotic, designed to hold attention against one's will. Determined to catch the perpetrators, Torres ordered a watch. On the night of July 16th, he positioned himself 50 yards from the clearing, hidden with a clear view of the site. At midnight, his breath caught in his throat. Two tall figures slipped from the woods, Ezekiel and Nathaniel Crow. They moved with eerie precision, carrying satchels and shaded lanterns. For nearly 2 hours, they worked in silence, adjusting objects in the spiral, carving new symbols, performing motions that resembled ritual more than labor. Their gestures were deliberate, practiced as though repeating a procedure drilled into them countless times. Watching them filled Torres with a dread so primal, it rooted him in place. Their movements seemed not merely human, but mechanical, like instruments executing instructions. He longed to confront them, to demand answers for the missing, but found himself paralyzed, unable to move. When at last the brothers departed, Torres dared to study what they had left behind. The arrangement had been altered again, new symbols etched, objects repositioned, and at the spiral's edge, a fresh addition, Deputy Marcus Glenn's badge. At dawn, Torres crept from hiding, only to discover something worse. Carved into the tree above his position was a message etched deep and unmistakable. "We know you're watching. Join us willingly or join the others permanently." Cold realization washed over him. He was no longer just an investigator, he was a target. The Crow twins weren't improvising. They were executing a plan. Their precision, their victim selection, their ability to anticipate his every move pointed to something far darker than murder. This was a design with purpose, a code written in blood geometry and fear. And whatever the final objective was, time for Culpeper was running out. When Torres mapped the missing townspeople's homes and routines, his blood ran cold. Their locations formed the same spiral pattern he had seen in the clearing, as if the entire town had been charted, every life measured, every disappearance selected for a role in a larger design. Dr. Fairfax arrived at the sheriff's office mid-morning with grim news. 3 more residents were gone: Helen Crawford, blacksmith, George Patterson, and widow Jane Carpenter. Their homes untouched, no struggle, the same carved symbol left behind. Fairfax, pale but steady, laid out his findings. The victims aren't random. They're pillars of the community: our deputy, our teacher, farmers, the telegraph operator, even the man who maintains the water system. Whoever is behind this is dismantling the town piece by piece. Torres felt the chill deepen. "You're saying they're destroying our ability to survive?" "Exactly," Fairfax replied. "And they're not finished." Before they could continue, Timothy Crawford burst through the door, sobbing. "Sheriff, I saw them take my mother." His words tumbled out between gasps. "I was supposed to be asleep, but I heard voices. I looked out the window. 2 men were carrying her. She wasn't fighting. Her eyes looked empty, like she was sleepwalking. And one of them, he looked right at me." He smiled. Torres knelt, steadying the boy's trembling hands. "Timothy, their faces. Did you see them? They wore black suits. They moved together like one person." "Sheriff, what did they do to my mother?" Torres exchanged a grim look with Fairfax. If the twins had found a way to control their victims, it explained everything: the lack of struggle, the quiet vanishings. He placed Timothy with the Hamilton family for safety, then organized a search party. The trail from the Crawford home cut too cleanly through the woods, almost as if it had been laid out for them. After 2 hours, they stumbled into a clearing none of them had ever known existed. What they found froze them in place. Wooden structures rose in geometric alignment, a hidden compound deep in the forest. Inside, shelves sagged under glass jars filled with unrecognizable specimens, chemical solutions glinting in the dim light. Tables bristled with instruments more suited for a city hospital than a Virginia backwater. Anatomical charts papered the walls like trophies. In the central building, the horror became undeniable. A crude surgical theater held 23 tables each, fitted with restraints and stained with blood. Preserved organs floated in jars. Detailed notes filled with diagrams and procedures described experiments in 2 distinct hands, Ezekiel's and Nathaniel's cold systematic records of torture disguised as research. Fairfax, pale and sweating, retched into the dirt. "Sheriff, these people weren't killed outright. They were experimented on while still alive, but no bodies were found. Only traces evidence of what had been done. The victims themselves had vanished." Then came the sound. Footsteps. 2 sets moving in perfect synchronization through the forest. The search party scrambled into cover weapons, trembling in their hands. Through the tree line stepped Ezekiel and Nathaniel Crow. In daylight, they looked less human than ever, gaunt pale, their immaculate black suits unmarked by the woods. Their movements eerily identical, as if driven by a single mind. Their eyes, once cold blue, had dulled to gray, lifeless and mechanical. They scanned the clearing not as men, but as scientists dissecting the world with their gaze. Ezekiel spoke first, his voice unnaturally strong, carrying across the clearing as though amplified by something unseen. "Sheriff Torres, Dr. Fairfax, gentlemen of Culpeper. We knew you would find our work. In truth, we intended it. We've been guiding you here, every step of the way." Nathaniel picked up his brother's thought without pause, his tone seamless, mechanical. "Your investigation has been most useful. You've helped us identify the final subjects we require, and your predictable responses allowed us to prepare for this last phase." Sheriff Torres stepped from cover, revolver in hand, though his grip trembled. "Where are they? Where are the people you took?" The twins exchanged a glance, less amusement than clinical interest. Ezekiel gestured lazily toward the surgical theater. "They served their purpose. Each subject yielded valuable data on physiology, psychology, and the manipulation of consciousness. That's torture." "That's murder," Dr. Fairfax shouted, voice breaking with both terror and outrage. "Those were human beings, not animals for dissection." Nathaniel tilted his head with inhuman precision. "Your sentiment is understandable, Doctor, but sentiment clouds progress. Our studies in Boston, Philadelphia, and New York provided theory. Culpeper provided practice subjects unlikely to attract outside interference. An isolated community," Ezekiel added smoothly. "Minimal law enforcement, trusting citizens, ideal for acquisition. We've now documented the full spectrum of human experimentation, from capture to conclusion, a complete methodology." Torres's stomach churned. They spoke of his neighbors, his friends, as though cataloging farm stock. "You're insane." "On the contrary," Nathaniel replied evenly. "Insanity is disorder. Our work is systematic. Objectives identified, methods refined, subjects acquired, results recorded. The only distinction between us and the colleges of medicine is that we are not shackled by obsolete ethics." Fairfax steadied himself, forcing the question. "Then, where are the bodies? What did you do with them?" The twins smiled in unison. Ezekiel gestured to a row of large glass containers along the far wall, their contents glinting faintly. "Waste not, want not. Properly preserved human tissue remains viable for extended study. We have developed methods to maintain specimens far beyond conventional limits." Torres felt bile rise. They hadn't merely killed the crows, had turned people into stored experiments, fragments cataloged for endless research. Nathaniel drew a leather-bound journal from his coat. Our research phase is complete. The findings are ready to be published. Though the academic establishment may resist your testimony, Sheriff will provide the necessary legitimacy. I'll never help you. Torres spat, though the tremor in his voice betrayed him. Oh, but you will, Nathaniel said, pulling a glass vial from his pocket, the liquid inside catching the light. This compound ensures total compliance. Subjects remain conscious, retain memory, but lose all capacity for resistance. We perfected it here on your townsfolk. Fairfax's face blanched. That's why no one fought back. You didn't abduct them, you drugged them. Precisely, Ezekiel confirmed. So much cleaner than brute force. A small injection and the strongest will collapse into cooperation. Torres realized, horrified, that the brothers hadn't cornered them for a speech they intended to add him and his men to their experiments. But Nathaniel's next words froze the sheriff's blood. There is, however, a complication, he said, with something that might have been irritation in a normal man. Our supplies are nearly depleted, and our last subjects proved insufficient. Ezekiel's pale eyes locked on Torres with predatory focus. We require replacements, strong-willed leaders, lawmen, physicians. Subjects of resilience and influence. Ideal material. The sheriff's world lurched as the truth crystallized. They had not stumbled upon the laboratory by chance. The obvious trail, the spiral arrangement, every planted clue, it was all bait. You led us here, Torres whispered, the pieces snapping together. Every step, even the boy. You orchestrated everything to bring us here. Naturally, the twins replied in unison, their synchronized voices bypassing reason and striking directly at Torres's primal instincts. The sound felt less like speech than like a command vibrating inside his skull. Despair pressed down on him, yet amid the suffocating dread, Torres noticed something vital. The laboratory, for all its sophistication, was fragile wooden walls, improvised structures, equipment built for research, not defense. And the twins themselves relied on chemicals and psychological control, not brute strength. He met Dr. Fairfax's eyes and saw the same realization reflected there. If they avoided the injections, they had a chance. With sudden clarity, Torres acted. Instead of answering the twins, he raised his revolver and fired into the rows of glass containers lining the walls. The result was instant. Specimens, chemicals, and preserved tissue burst into fragments. Acrid smoke filled the air as volatile compounds mixed, sparking small fires that raced across the laboratory floor. The clearing erupted in chaos. Run, Torres shouted, though his men were already fleeing toward the tree-line instincts, carrying them from the nightmare they had uncovered. Torres turned to follow, but froze at the sound behind him. Laughter. Not madness, but measured amusement, the calm satisfaction of scientists recording expected results. Excellent, Sheriff Ezekiel called through the smoke, his voice steady and clear. Your reaction has given us the final data point we required. The psychological profile of authority under extreme stress is complete. Phase 1 of the Culpeper project is concluded, Nathaniel added. Phase 2 will begin elsewhere, refined by what we've learned here. The words hammered Torres's mind as he stumbled into the forest smoke, stinging his eyes. Culpeper hadn't been their obsession. It had been their testing ground. And the experiments were only the beginning. Breaking through the trees, he staggered onto the hillside overlooking the valley. His breath caught. Thin, unnatural columns of smoke rose from precise points throughout town, the church, the courthouse, the schoolhouse, even private homes. The symmetry was unmistakable, and then he saw them. Figures moving through the streets in eerily perfect formations, silent, coordinated, mechanical. Dozens of townsfolk, their neighbors and friends, all walking as if controlled by one unseen will. Torres's heart hammered as he scrambled down the slope. At the edge of town, Dr. Fairfax emerged from the woods, pale and shaking. He seized Torres's arm. Sheriff, the people. I saw at least 30. They're working in groups, carrying supplies, clearing streets, but not speaking, not looking at each other. It's as if they share one mind. Torres lifted his spyglass, his hands trembling. Through the lens, he saw Main Street, once the heart of Culpeper's community, now transformed into a grotesque machine. Families, farmers, merchants, all moving in silent unison, their faces blank, their actions precise. The Crows hadn't just experimented on individuals. They had turned the entire town into a living experiment. The townsfolk moved with mechanical precision, yet they weren't acting like prisoners. They were working together with an eerie sense of purpose, systematically hauling belongings into the streets and arranging them in the same geometric patterns Torres had seen in the forest. Mrs. Henley, the kindly innkeeper, was side by side with Reverend Halloway, methodically positioning furniture in spirals. Samuel Reed, once a respected merchant, now directed his neighbors like an architect of madness, measuring distances with a cold efficiency. And most horrifying of all, young Timothy Crawford, his face slack, his eyes glazed, helped place objects with the same mechanical obedience as the adults. "They're not being forced," Torres whispered, his voice breaking. "They think this is their choice." The twins made them believe this. Dr. Fairfax's hands trembled as he lowered his field glasses. "It's more advanced than compliance. They've altered their very motivations, rewired their decision-making. Look at them. They look content. They believe this is meaningful work." Indeed, the residents' faces showed no fear, no anguish. Instead, they bore the calm focus of craftsmen dedicated to a sacred task, as if turning their homes into occult diagrams was the highest calling of their lives. And then the greater pattern began to emerge. From his vantage point, Torres saw its streets being cleared into sightlines, houses gutted and restructured as observation posts. Every possession woven into a vast geometric design that encompassed the entire town. Sheriff Fairfax hissed, pointing, "The courthouse tower." Torres swung his spyglass upward. Two figures stood atop the clock tower, silhouettes against the fading light. Perfectly still, perfectly synchronized. Even at this distance, there was no mistaking them, Ezekiel and Nathaniel Crow. One twin raised a telescope, meticulously charting the designs forming below. The other scribbled notes in a journal recording Culpeper's transformation with the same detached precision they had applied to their human experiments. "They're treating the town as one vast laboratory." Torres muttered, bile rising in his throat. Every person, every building, every street part of their experiment. Fairfax lowered his glasses, his expression hardened with resolve. "Sheriff, we have to stop this. If they've learned to control entire communities, Culpeper won't be the end. They'll move on to cities, to governments, to armies. They could destabilize the entire nation." Torres felt the weight crush down on him. His failure here wouldn't just doom Culpeper, it might open the door to something monstrous spreading across America. But then, amid his dread, he noticed something. The townsfolk's movements, though mechanical, were not chaotic. They followed rhythms, repeated sequences, predictable cycles. Patterns. And in patterns, Torres knew there were weaknesses. The remaining townsfolk moved with uncanny order, not like captives, but like willing participants. They arranged furniture, tools, and personal belongings into spirals and geometric alignments, their faces slack yet content. Mrs. Henley worked beside Reverend Halloway as if arranging sacred relics, while Samuel Reed directed groups with the precision of an engineer. Even young Timothy Crawford labored among them, his blank eyes betraying no recognition. "They're not being forced," Torres whispered, horror hollowing his chest. "They think this is their will." Dr. Fairfax's jaw tightened. "It's more advanced than compliance. They've rewritten their drives entirely. Look at them, they're satisfied." Torres studied the pattern unfolding across the town, realizing it was no longer just fragments in fields and clearings. The Crows were turning all of Culpeper into a single experiment. Sightlines carved through streets, buildings transformed into vantage points. Every life, every possession integrated into a vast geometric design. Sheriff Fairfax breathed, pointing to the courthouse tower. Through his spyglass, Torres saw them. Ezekiel and Nathaniel Crow, side by side atop the clock tower, surveying their creation. One calculated through a telescope, the other scribbled notes into a journal. Not masters of chaos, but architects orchestrating the town as their machine. They're directing it all, Torres muttered. Cut them off and maybe the hold breaks. Fairfax's eyes narrowed. Yes, but it means facing them in their nest. Torres checked his revolver, 4 bullets left. It wasn't much. He handed Fairfax his evidence, his notes, everything they had uncovered. If I don't come back, you get this out. Someone has to know what the Crows are capable of. Fairfax tried to protest, but Torres silenced him. This is my burden. I failed to protect Culpeper once. I won't fail again. Moving through the warped streets, Torres drew on the instincts of his soldiering days. The residents ignored him entirely, too absorbed in their tasks. Their blank contentment was worse than hostility. Behind an overturned wagon, he froze, listening as the Crows' voices carried over the entire town. Calm resonance synchronized. Citizens of our research community, they intoned. You have contributed magnificently to the advancement of human knowledge. Your efforts will allow us to expand to larger populations, achieving perfect social order through scientific mastery of human consciousness. Torres's grip on his revolver tightened. The missing 23 had been disposed of once their data was recorded. The rest of the town would soon share that fate. He climbed the courthouse stairs, every step heavier than the last, their voices echoing above him. Our methods have already drawn interest from Richmond, Baltimore, Washington. Governments and institutions eager for our techniques to manage difficult populations to ensure stability. The words struck Torres like blows. The Crows weren't just destroying Culpeper, they were preparing to sell obedience itself to the highest bidder. At the top of the tower, he found them. Ezekiel and Nathaniel stood side by side, faces waxen, movements precise as clockwork. They didn't turn as he entered, as though his arrival had been expected, measured inevitable. Sheriff Torres, they said together, voices flat harmonic. You arrive exactly as projected. Your predictability has been invaluable to our research. Torres leveled his revolver steadier than he thought he'd be. It's over. You're under arrest for the murders of 23 citizens of Culpeper County. The twins finally turned to face him. Their colorless eyes held no fear, no urgency, not even recognition of Torres as a threat. They regarded him with the same detached curiosity they had shown throughout the investigation, as though he were a specimen in one of their jars. You still don't understand. Ezekiel said, his voice carrying the echo of something that might have been pity in a human being. We are beyond your primitive notions of law and justice. We have transcended the limits of ordinary consciousness. Nathaniel gestured to the transformed town below. What you call murder we recognize as necessary research. What you call crime we know as progress. Your moral framework is inadequate for comprehending our work. Torres's chest burned with rage. You're not scientists. You're monsters who torture and kill for your own twisted satisfaction. Monsters, the twins repeated, considering the word as if it were an academic term. An interesting response. Tell us, Sheriff, what separates our procedures from those of physicians in medical colleges? What distinguishes us from soldiers perfecting new weapons? The difference, Torres said, surprised by the steadiness of his own voice, is that doctors save lives and soldiers fight to protect them. You don't protect anyone. You destroy. You kill for amusement disguised as science. The twins exchanged a silent glance, some wordless communication passing between them, and turned back to him with expressions that resembled disappointment. Your perspective is limited, Ezekiel said. But you've served your purpose. Your investigation has given us invaluable data about law enforcement under stress. Nathaniel drew a glass vial of clear liquid from his coat. Now you will contribute more directly. This refined compound will free you from sentiment and grant you the clarity of pure objectivity. Torres saw what they intended to strip away his will and turn him into another instrument of their work. He didn't hesitate. He pulled the trigger. The revolver's report thundered through Culpeper. Nathaniel staggered, staring down at the spreading bloom of blood on his white shirt. His voice was calm, curious, fascinating. The physiological response to projectile trauma is exactly as documented. Ezekiel betrayed no emotion. He opened his journal and began recording. Wound placement suggests organ failure. Blood loss indicates termination in approximately 15 minutes. Torres fired again. The second shot struck Ezekiel in the chest. Like his brother, he showed no fear, no pain, only detached interest in the mechanics of his own dying. Together, they said, their voices weakening, but still synchronized. You have provided us with excellent final data. The psychological profile of law enforcement under extreme stress is now complete. They collapsed, side by side, still mirroring one another. From the streets below came cries of confusion. The precise mechanical order of the townsfolk broke apart into chaos. People stumbled, blinked, called out in disorientation. Fairfax had been right. The twins' deaths had shattered their hold. Torres stood over the dying brothers, revolver heavy in his hand. Why, he demanded, voice raw. Why do this to innocent people? With their final breaths, the Crow twins gave the answer that would haunt him until his death. Because we could. Because humanity is nothing but resource. Because the advancement of knowledge justifies any sacrifice. They exhaled together one last time, their pale eyes still open, fixed on the summer sky with the same cold detachment that had marked every life they destroyed. In the weeks that followed, the scale of the devastation emerged. Of Culpeper's 800 residents, only 347 survived the summer of 1847. The 23 taken in the first wave were never found. Despite exhaustive searches of the forest compound, their fates remained a mystery that haunted the survivors for generations. Freed from the twins' chemical grip, the surviving townsfolk struggled to piece together what had happened. Their memories were fractured, dreamlike. Most recalled arranging furniture tools and personal possessions into spirals and patterns, but none could explain why the task had felt so vital. Dr. Thomas Fairfax documented their accounts in painstaking detail, creating one of the earliest recorded studies of mass psychological manipulation in American medicine. Sheriff William Torres compiled his own exhaustive report notes on the twins' laboratory, their methods, their chemical compounds, and their potential threat to public safety. But when he submitted it to state and federal authorities, he met a wall of resistance. The Virginia State Police dismissed it as a local matter. Federal marshals confiscated nearly all the physical evidence, lab equipment, research notes, chemical samples. The official conclusion labeled Ezekiel and Nathaniel Crow as nothing more than deranged criminals. Fairfax's attempts to publish his findings in medical journals were similarly silenced. His accounts were rejected as anecdotal, lacking scientific rigor, too extraordinary to be credible. Within a few years, nearly every trace of the Crow case had been erased. The courthouse fire of 1851 destroyed the remaining local records, and federal files vanished into archives where they would never again see daylight. For the survivors, the summer of 1847 was a wound that never healed. Out of Culpeper's 800 residents, fewer than 350 lived to rebuild their community. Many fled the county entirely unwilling to remain where their memories had been twisted against them. Those who stayed spoke little of what had happened. Torres himself served as sheriff until his death in 1863, though his private journals reveal he spent his final years chasing rumors of similar experiments in other towns. Fairfax left for Europe in 1849, seeking a more receptive scientific environment. His later work in Vienna and Paris helped shape early psychiatry and neurochemistry, though he never publicly connected his research to the horrors in Culpeper. As for the twins' laboratory, it was destroyed in a fire that burned hot enough to melt glass and consume even stone. No natural blaze could have produced such devastation, suggesting someone deliberately erased the last physical proof of their work. Local folklore claims the twins' influence never fully ended. Hikers and farmers sometimes report geometric patterns in the woods, stones, branches, flowers arranged in spirals. Most dismiss them as coincidence, but Fairfax's later correspondence hints otherwise. He received reports of similar phenomena in remote communities across America and Europe. Coordinated behavior, unexplained vanishings, people with knowledge of chemical and psychological manipulation far beyond their education. Perhaps the crows weren't anomalies. Perhaps they were part of something larger. The truth about Ezekiel and Nathaniel Crow, where they learned their techniques, who might have supported them, and whether their method survived, died with them in the Culpeper courthouse tower. But the questions they raised remain. How vulnerable is human consciousness to manipulation? How far will authorities go to bury the truth rather than confront it? And how many times, in how many other towns, has history chosen silence over revelation? What do you think? Was Culpeper an isolated nightmare or the fragment of a much larger network hidden in the shadows of history? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. And if you want more stories like this, tales of forgotten horrors, suppressed records, and America's darkest secrets, subscribe, ring the notification bell, and share with someone who loves mysteries as much as you do. There are countless stories still waiting to be uncovered. I'll see you in the next one.
Thank you everyone for watching the whole video. Please like and subscribe to watch more good videos.